Welcome. You're listening to Detective Duo, bringing you tales from the golden age of mystery, adventures in the spirit of Tommy and Tuppence Beresford. Tap subscribe to stay with us and share where in the world you're listening from. London, 1953. The rain had a way of whispering secrets against the neon glass of Soho. It hissed down the narrow lanes like a warning, collecting in gutters where cigarette ends drowned beside torn theatre bills. The Blue Velvet Club stood defiantly at the end of Dean Street, its blue sign flickering through the drizzle as though the current itself were tired. Inside, smoke curled beneath chandeliers that had once known better days, and the air hummed with the hush that falls before an encore. On stage, Lena Marlowe let the final note linger. Her voice was velvet and whiskey mixed, brushing every listener's ear with something halfway between comfort and confession. She stood beneath a single spotlight, sequins catching the light like small sparks in the gloom. When the pianist hit the last chord of I'll Remember You, she lowered the microphone, smiled a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and bowed. Applause rose like a breaking wave. Men in Homburgs tapped their rings against champagne glasses. Women dabbed at corners of eyes that glistened as much from gin as sentiment. Lena gave them one more kiss of her hand, turned, and disappeared behind the red velvet curtain. The curtain sighed shut. For a moment, the club exhaled, chairs scraped, matches flared, orders were shouted over the din. Then the applause thinned, conversation resumed, and only the pianist remained staring toward the stage door as though expecting her to reappear. But Lena Marlowe, Queen of Midnight, had taken her final bow in more ways than one. Backstage, the corridor smelled of powder and stale perfume. Victor Dane, the manager, fussed with a ledger under one arm and a cigarette clinging to his lip. "Good house tonight," he muttered to the stagehand. "If Miss Marlowe keeps drawing like this, we'll—" He stopped. Lena's dressing room door stood half open, light spilling across the corridor. "Lena?" he called. No answer. He knocked, pushed the door wider, and froze. The mirror still glowed from the bulbs around its frame, throwing reflections of sequins and silk. On the vanity lay her purse, gloves, and a fur stole. The teacup she'd left beside the powder box was still warm, but the chair was empty, and her coat hung untouched on the hook. "Good Lord," whispered Dane. He checked the tiny lavatory, then the passage toward the rear exit. Nothing. Panic twitched across his features. The man was used to drunken singers and late arrivals, not vanishing acts. "Find Toby," he barked to the stagehand. "Now." In the main room, the lights had softened to that after-midnight melancholy when brandy replaces champagne and people begin to tell truths they'll regret by morning. At the bar sat Miss Beatrice Vale, notebook closed beside her glass of soda water, the only woman in the place drinking one. Her auburn hair caught the dim light, and her eyes, grey-green and thoughtful, scanned the room with a reporter's practiced ease. She'd come chasing a small feature, Soho After Dark, the new voice of Velvet. Nothing sensational, but when the manager's raised voice cut through the music, she straightened. A waiter hurried past, whispering, "Miss Marlowe's gone missing." "Missing?" Beatrice asked, rising. "Vanished, they say. Dressing room's empty." Moments later, the door swung open to admit a gust of rain and authority in the person of Inspector Hugh Grantley of Scotland Yard. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose trench coat seemed part of the weather itself. He had been dining nearby when the call came in, and the expression behind his rain-specked spectacles suggested he'd expected something dreary and found intrigue instead. "Who's in charge here?" he asked. "Victor Dane," said Beatrice promptly, stepping forward before the manager could recover his wits. "And you'll want to see the dressing room." Grantley's eyes flicked to her. "And you are?" "Beatrice Vale, Evening Gazette. I was here for Miss Marlowe's performance." He considered that, then nodded curtly. "Stay where I can see you, Miss Vale. Journalists tend to trample evidence." "I only trample egos," she replied, following anyway. Inside the dressing room, Grantley's flashlight swept across the scene. The reflection of its beam fractured in the mirror's surface, glancing off rouge tins and perfume bottles. He noted the untouched coat, the closed window, the single teacup with a trace of lipstick. "No struggle?" he murmured. "No sign she left in a hurry. Yet she's gone." Dane wrung his hands. "I swear she was fine after the second set. Said she'd sing one more number and then talk about, well, never mind that." "About what?" Beatrice asked sharply. Dane hesitated. A telegram. Came just before the show. She read it, turned pale, then told me she'd see me after midnight. Grantley pocketed the clue in his mind. Where's this telegram now? Gone. She tore it up. The inspector crouched near the door. Something faintly crimson caught the beam, a sliver of feather. He lifted it carefully with tweezers from his case. Part of her boa, I'd say. Her boa was on stage, Dane protested. Then she wore more than one, Grantley said evenly. Or someone wanted us to think so. Beatrice, watching from the doorway, noted how the feather quivered in the draught from the alley beyond. The door there stood ajar, rain glistening on its threshold. Outside, the alley smelled of coal smoke and wet stone. A cat bolted between bins. Water dripped from fire escapes. Grantley's torch traced tire marks dissolving in puddles. Recent, he muttered. Big car, perhaps a Daimler. Beatrice pulled her coat closer. You think she was taken? I think someone left in haste. Whether she was willing is another matter. He turned to her. You said you were writing about her. Did she seem troubled tonight? Worried, Beatrice said slowly. She kept glancing toward the corner table. A man in a grey overcoat. American by the look of him. She sang the last verse straight to him. Name? I never caught it, but I can find out. Grantley studied her for a long moment, the rain making halos around the street lamp behind her. You journalists always do. Back inside, the pianist Toby Field sat at the empty piano, cigarette burning down between his fingers. His eyes were red, whether from smoke or emotion neither could tell. She wouldn't just go, he said hoarsely. Lena loved the spotlight too much. Did you know of any trouble? Grantley asked. He shrugged. She got letters, always letters, from men who thought they loved her or owed her. But tonight, he hesitated. There was a row before the show. She said someone was coming who could ruin everything. Beatrice leaned in. Someone from New York? Toby blinked. How do you know? Call it instinct, she murmured, scribbling a note. Grantley gave her a look that mixed irritation with reluctant admiration. If you're finished, Miss Vale, I'd like to question him without your headlines in the way. She smiled faintly. You'll find the truth makes better headlines than anything I could invent. By 2 o'clock, the club had emptied save for police and the faint echo of Lena's last note still clinging to the air. Rain swept down Dean Street harder now, washing neon into streams of blue and pink across the pavement. Beatrice stood under the awning, watching the constables seal the rear door. Grantley joined her, lighting a cigarette beneath the brim of his hat. Ever seen anyone vanish so neatly? She asked. Only magicians, he said, but they usually leave a puff of smoke. Perhaps this one left a song instead. He glanced at her. You're enjoying this. I'm terrified, she corrected softly, but I'd rather be terrified than bored. He exhaled smoke into the wet air. Go home, Miss Vale. Let the yard handle its mysteries. She nodded, but her eyes drifted once more to the alley. Something glimmered there under the lamplight, half buried in the gutter. She stepped forward, crouched and lifted it carefully, a single red feather, sodden and bright against the grey stone. She looked back at Grantley, but he was already turning toward his car. The feather trembled in her hand like the heartbeat of a secret. Minutes later, with Reeves on scene, Grantley confirmed the tread as likely Daimler and ordered a canvass of nearby garages and chauffeurs. They moved inside to lock the exits and take statements. The alley offered little else, overflowing dustbins, a discarded crate stamped produce of Spain, and the faint perfume of Lena Marlowe still hanging in the damp air, ghost-like and stubborn. Somewhere above them, a window slammed. The sound echoed down like punctuation to a riddle. Inside, the club had been reduced to chaos disguised as order. Policemen moved between tables, taking statements. The pianist Toby Field sat slumped near the bar, eyes fixed on his empty glass. And the manager, Victor Dane, hovered with the nervous dignity of a man whose livelihood had just been taken hostage by Scotland Yard. Beatrice Vale had not gone home, though Grantley had told her to. She had merely shifted chairs. Now she occupied a small corner booth with her notebook open, watching everything with the patience of a cat at a mouse hole. Her hat was slightly askew, her lipstick had faded, but her eyes were alive, bright, assessing, unafraid. Grantley approached, raincoat trailing droplets across the carpet. "Miss Vale," he said without preamble, "still trampling egos?" "Yours is proving resilient," she returned smoothly. You'll be pleased to know I've already saved you time." "That's rare," he said dryly. "What have you discovered, besides the best lighting for scandal?" "A waiter named Jacko claims he saw a black Daimler parked in the alley 5 minutes before midnight. He said it wasn't there earlier." Grantley's brows lifted. "Jacko what?" "Just Jacko. He says surnames are for tax forms." She closed the notebook. "He described the driver as tall, wearing gloves, face hidden by a cap." "Colour of the gloves?" "Grey." Grantley smiled faintly. "You really should apply for the yard." "I'd hate the uniform," she replied. "Besides, I'm partial to asking questions you can't." He left her with that, crossing to where Toby Fields sat hunched over the piano, cigarette smoke rising in uncertain spirals. "Toby Fields?" The man nodded without looking up. His fingers idly touched the keys, a half-remembered melody that died before it found its note. "Tell me about Miss Marlowe," Grantley said. "What's to tell?" She sang. They listened. "You argued with her tonight." Toby's shoulders stiffened. "Who told you that?" "Your manager, your journalist friend. Take your pick." He sighed. "All right. She was nervous before the last set. Said she'd got a telegram from New York." He flicked ash into the empty whiskey glass. "I asked what it was about. She said it changed everything. We had words and I stormed off. That's it." "From New York?" Grantley repeated. "She ever mention anyone there?" Toby hesitated. "A man named R. something. Devereaux, maybe. She said he'd promised her a new start." Grantley scribbled the name on his notepad. "You didn't keep the telegram?" "She tore it up." A pause. "She always tore things up when she was frightened." Grantley studied him. "You cared for her?" "I played for her," Toby said. "Same thing sometimes." In the manager's office, Victor Dane had surrounded himself with ledgers as though arithmetic could defend against suspicion. The room smelled of ink, cigars, and desperation. He looked up as Grantley entered. "Inspector, I've told your men everything. I was in here balancing receipts." "Until when?" 12:15. Ask the cashier." Grantley's gaze flicked to the clock on the wall, its hands frozen at 10 to 12. "Your clock's wrong. It stopped yesterday." "Convenient." Dane flushed. "I've run this place 12 years without incident. You think I'd start abducting my own singer?" "Some managers do worse for smaller debts," Grantley replied. "You owe a bookmaker named Tanner, don't you?" Dane stiffened. "How?" "I read ledgers too." The inspector's tone softened. "If Miss Marlowe was in trouble, I'll find who put her there. For your sake, I suggest it isn't you." When he left, Beatrice was waiting by the door, arms folded. "You're enjoying the smell of fear," she observed. "Fear tells the truth faster than friendship," he said. "Now, since you're determined to stay underfoot, make yourself useful. Find the waiter again. I want that Daimler traced." "Already did," she said with a small smile. "He's vanished." "Everyone's vanishing tonight," Grantley muttered. Half an hour later, a constable's shout echoed from the back corridor. "Sir, something here!" They found it lying half-hidden near the alley door, a diamond teardrop earring, gleaming wet in the torchlight. Grantley picked it up carefully. "Real stone," he murmured, "and not part of her stage costume." Beatrice appeared at his shoulder. Lena wore rhinestones. She'd never risk losing real diamonds in the spotlight. "So, whose is it?" "That," she said softly, "is the first good question you've asked tonight." Grantley turned the earring over in his palm, noting the fine clasp, the trace of perfume, not Lena's usual violet, but something heavier, musky, unfamiliar. "Could belong to one of the chorus girls," he said. "Or to a woman who wanted to be mistaken for one," Beatrice countered. He looked at her again, truly looked. "You've spent more nights in clubs like this than you care to admit, haven't you, Miss Vale?" She met his gaze coolly. "Journalism requires field work." "It requires nerve," he said. "You've got that. Possibly more than sense." By 3 o'clock the club was silent, save for the whisper of mops across the floor. The constables had gone. Only Grantley and Beatrice remained, standing by the open door where the night air crept in cold and metallic. The city beyond was a maze of glimmering streets and muffled engines. "She could have walked out," Beatrice said at last. "No struggle, no witness, no blood. What if she meant to vanish?" Grantley frowned. "Why would she?" "Fear, or freedom. People disappear every day, Inspector. Some because they're taken, some because they choose to go. He glanced at her sidelong. "And you think Miss Marlowe chose?" Beatrice looked out into the rain. "If I were her, young, talented, and tangled with men who use promises like weapons, I might have." He pocketed the earring carefully. "I prefer evidence to intuition." "And I prefer intuition," she said. "It turns into evidence when men like you finally believe it." Grantley smiled despite himself. "Then perhaps we'll both be right." As he locked the rear door, the torchlight swept once more across the alley. The tire marks had nearly vanished under the new rain. Only the faint smell of exhaust lingered, and something else, lighter, floral, as if a perfume had hung there waiting for notice. He turned off the torch. The darkness closed like a curtain. Behind him, Beatrice's heels clicked on the wet stone. "Inspector," she called softly, "if she planned it, if Lena truly meant to disappear, what does that make the rest of us?" Grantley looked back toward the silent club, the neon sign bleeding blue into the mist. "Witnesses," he said, "or accomplices. Time will tell." A gust of wind swept through the alley, rattling a loose shutter and carrying with it a single glint of something bright, a second diamond teardrop earring, caught in the lamplight before tumbling into the drain. Morning crept reluctantly over London, its light more pewter than gold. The fog had thickened overnight, curling around chimneys and blurring the outlines of rooftops into ghostly silhouettes. Beatrice Vale moved through Bloomsbury with a briskness that denied her sleepless night. She had convinced herself it wasn't curiosity driving her to Lena Marlowe's flat, it was duty. Yet curiosity, as ever, walked beside her like a mischievous twin. The building stood at the corner of Mecklenburgh Square, one of those Edwardian red-brick blocks whose neat respectability only sharpened the loneliness of their inhabitants. A caretaker with a broom eyed her skeptically until she showed her press card. Then, with a shrug that could have belonged to any London janitor since Dickens, he pointed her upstairs. "Second floor, last door. Pretty place, but she wasn't there much," he said. "Quiet girl, or so we thought." Beatrice thanked him and climbed the stairs, her footsteps muffled on the worn runner. The door was unlocked. Grantley had left it so for her, a silent acknowledgement of her persistence. She smiled faintly. He was learning it was easier to let her in than to keep her out. Inside, Lena's flat had the melancholy air of a stage after the curtain has fallen. The perfume still lingered, faint violets mixed with tobacco and a trace of powder. A piano occupied the corner, its lid open, sheet music scattered across it like fallen leaves. Titles whispered of nostalgia. "I'll Remember You," "Smoke Rings," "My Foolish Heart." Beatrice moved slowly, noting everything. On the small writing desk sat an open suitcase half-packed with evening gowns and a single ticket stub from Paris tucked between silk slips. Her reporter's instinct tightened. Lena had been preparing to leave, but for where and with whom? Near the window stood a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon, too orderly to belong to chaos. She opened one, postmarked New York, written in a bold masculine hand. Only the closing remained, "Yours, R.D." Another bore the address, Hotel Savoy, London. But one envelope lay torn in half as though destroyed in anger. The signature was still visible, R. Devereux. "R. Devereux," Beatrice murmured. "Who are you, and why did she tear you to pieces?" A shadow crossed the fogged glass. "That's precisely what I'd like to know," said a familiar voice. Grantley filled the doorway, coat collar damp with fog, his expression more wry than disapproving. "You do realize breaking and entering is frowned upon." "The door was open," she said sweetly, "and I consider it research." He stepped inside, glancing around. "You've a journalist's talent for tidying crime scenes into paragraphs." "Then read this one," she replied, handing him the letter fragment. He studied it. "Hotel Savoy," he read aloud. "So our Miss Marlowe had friends in high places." "Or low ones pretending to be high," she said. "Devereux. The name sound familiar?" Grantley shook his head. "No, but it soon will. I've already arranged to question one of her colleagues, a chorus girl named Millie Rose. Jealous type." Jealousy, Beatrice mused. The first refuge of the mediocre. Grantley allowed himself a brief smile. "You're coming with me, aren't you?" "You'd only have to fetch me later," she said, reaching for her gloves. The blue velvet's dressing annex was a shadow of last night's glamour. The stage was bare, lights cold, and the scent of spilled gin replaced the perfume of applause. Millie Rose sat on a stool by the mirror, painting on her face as though courage could be applied in layers. Her blonde curls were too perfect, her laugh too quick. "You want to know about Lena," she said. "Everyone does now, don't they? She always got the songs, the compliments, the attention, but she wasn't as grand as she thought." Grantley's tone stayed neutral. "You saw her after the last set?" Millie's painted mouth tightened. "I saw her whispering to a man in a grey overcoat, tall, dark hair, foreign look about him. She met his eyes the way you do when you're about to say goodbye forever." "Did she leave with him?" "I didn't see. I was busy watching the audience applaud me for once." Beatrice leaned forward. "And you're sure of the time?" Millie shrugged. "Quarter to midnight, maybe. But don't ask me for details. I was on next, and nerves don't keep clocks." Grantley glanced at Beatrice, who mouthed silently, "Grey overcoat, the man from her table." He turned back to Millie. "You ever hear the name Devereux?" She frowned. "Sounds foreign. She got letters from America, if that helps." She'd read them and smile like they contained a promise nobody else was meant to understand. "Did she ever mention being afraid?" Millie's brush paused. "Once. Said she thought someone from the embassy was watching her. I told her she read too many spy novels." Grantley's eyebrows lifted. "The embassy?" "She didn't say which one," Millie muttered. "And now she's gone. You'll blame me for it, won't you?" "Not unless you were wearing a grey overcoat," Beatrice said lightly. The chorus girl's reflection met hers in the mirror, defensive, defiant, and faintly frightened. "I don't wear grey," she whispered. "It makes me look honest." By late afternoon, the fog had thickened into a living thing, wrapping London in muffled silence. Beatrice and Grantley walked side by side down Shaftesbury Avenue, her umbrella tilted against the drizzle. "She's lying," Beatrice said. Millie rose. "Of course, but not about everything. She saw something, perhaps too much. That business about the embassy, man, that's not an actress's invention." Grantley nodded slowly. "We received a telephone call at the Yard this morning, anonymous. A woman's voice, disguised, said Lena Marlowe wasn't missing, she was hiding, running from her past." "Her past in New York, perhaps," Beatrice said. "A Devereux connection, or something darker." Grantley's mouth twitched. "You realize this could be nothing more than gossip. Entertainers thrive on melodrama." Beatrice looked at him sidelong. "You think everything is melodrama until it's murder." They paused beneath a street lamp outside a newsstand. The early edition carried Lena's photograph. "Nightclub star vanishes after final song." Beneath it, Beatrice's own initials gleamed beside her copy. She winced slightly. "Quick work," Grantley said dryly. "Habit," she murmured. "Besides, the public likes its mysteries before breakfast." He smiled faintly. "And you, Miss Vale, do you?" She met his gaze squarely. "I prefer them after. Then I can think clearly." They walked on. The lamps burned through fog like dim halos, and the sound of their steps merged with the hiss of passing tires. Neither spoke for several streets. That evening, Grantley invited her, unofficially, to the Yard. The office smelled of tobacco and typewriter ink, the walls lined with evidence boards that told their own stories in pins and twine. He poured 2 cups of tea, ignoring her arched eyebrow at the lack of whiskey. "I've checked with the Savoy," he said. "There's a guest registered under R. Devereux, diplomatic credentials, arrived from Berlin 6 weeks ago." "Berlin," Beatrice repeated thoughtfully. "Post-war diplomacy, smuggling, black market art. Take your pick." "I'll interview him in the morning," Grantley said. "You'll keep it out of print until then?" "Of course," she said, smiling. "Just as soon as I write the next article. The man at the Savoy, a diplomat and a disappearing songbird." Grantley sighed. "You're impossible." "That's why you keep me around," she said lightly, rising, "and because I notice things you miss." He watched her cross to the door, her silhouette framed in the amber light. "Miss Vale," he called softly, "you ever get the feeling we're chasing a ghost?" She paused. "Not a ghost," she said. "A woman clever enough to become one." And with that, she was gone, her heels echoing down the corridor like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence neither of them yet understood. Outside, the fog thickened once more, swallowing the city whole. Somewhere in its folds, the truth waited, wearing Lena Marlowe's perfume and a smile no one could yet decipher. The Savoy Hotel wore the morning like a diamond under glass, bright, polished, and faintly indifferent. Bellboys moved with rehearsed discretion. Porters glided like well-oiled machinery, and behind every smile lurked a rulebook. Beatrice Vale paused under the marbled archway, shaking the drizzle from her umbrella, and glanced up at the gilt clock above the concierge desk. 10 minutes to 10, a civilized hour for most meetings, though not, she suspected, for diplomacy. She smoothed her gloves, caught her reflection in a mirrored pillar, and thought fleetingly of Lena Marlowe's reflection in that fogged dressing-room mirror, gone, like a candle snuffed mid-song. Then she turned to the desk. "Richard Devereux, please," she said. "Sweet number, if you'd be so kind." The clerk's professional smile wavered. "Mr. Devereux has asked not to be disturbed." "Then he'll be doubly delighted to see me," she said cheerfully, producing her press card. "Beatrice Vale, Evening Gazette. You may tell him it concerns Miss Lena Marlowe." The name did its work. 10 minutes later, she was being escorted through corridors scented faintly of lilies and polished wood to the suite overlooking the Thames. The door opened on a room that looked as if it had been arranged for an illustrated magazine. Soft blue curtains, a writing desk with too many papers, and a man who could have been painted into the composition, tall, immaculate and unflustered. His hair was fair and precise, his eyes a cool steel grey. "Miss Vale," he said, extending a hand. "I've read your work. You have the gift of making London sound almost romantic." She smiled thinly. "Then let's see if I can make you sound honest." He laughed, a short, well-practiced sound. The journalist's creed. "Please, do sit down. May I offer you coffee?" "Not unless it comes with the truth," she replied, lowering herself into the armchair. "You knew Lena Marlowe." "I did, slightly. She sang at a private function last spring for certain visiting officials. A charming performance, though perhaps too emotional for the occasion." Beatrice crossed one leg neatly over the other. "And after that?" "After that?" He shrugged, elegant even in evasion. "We exchanged a few pleasantries, a note of thanks perhaps. Purely professional, I assure you." "She kept your letters." He smiled, faintly weary. "Did she? Artists are sentimental. I imagine she kept many." Beatrice studied him. "You seem remarkably calm, considering she's disappeared." "I read the morning papers," he said softly. "It's tragic, but the entertainment world thrives on reinvention. Perhaps she's simply taken time away." "Leaving her purse, coat and teacup," Beatrice said. "Unlikely." Devereux's expression flickered, just for a heartbeat. "You have a talent for dramatics, Miss Vale." "Only when the facts demand it." He rose, turning to the window where fog rolled above the river like slow smoke. "You must understand. My position is delicate. There are political matters one cannot discuss." "That must make conversation difficult," she said. He looked over his shoulder. "Do you always confuse curiosity with courage?" "I confuse nothing," Beatrice replied. "But I've learned that when men say political, they usually mean compromising." Devereux's smile returned, sharper this time. "Then perhaps you should write fiction instead of news." "Oh, I do," she said. "Only mine happens to be true." An hour later, Inspector Grantley was less polite. He stood in the records office at Scotland Yard, sleeves rolled up, cigarette forgotten in the ashtray beside him. Files lay open like flayed skins across the desk. "Richard Devereux," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "Diplomatic attaché, post-war liaison with Berlin. Commendation from the Foreign Office. And a gap." "Gap?" Sergeant Reeves leaned closer. 3 months unaccounted for," Grantley said. "Passport stamped out of Germany. No record of entry until 6 weeks later. Conveniently, the same period Lena Marlowe was performing for that private function." He exhaled slowly. "Damn me if it doesn't smell of secrets." Reeves looked sceptical. "You think he's our man?" "I think," Grantley said, snapping the file shut, "he's either lying about Lena or lying about something much bigger." By afternoon, Beatrice had installed herself in the tea lounge at the Savoy, pretending to read while keeping a keen eye on the lobby. The pianist played softly in the corner, a polite echo of what Lena once was. The clock ticked toward 4 before Devereux appeared again. Same immaculate composure, same unhurried stride. She waited until he'd ordered his drink before slipping into the chair opposite him. She noticed a Portuguese carnation in his lapel and a Lisbon-bound timetable folded inside his folio. "Back so soon?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "I forgot to ask," she said, "whether Miss Marlowe ever mentioned the blue note." Devereux froze mid-sip. It was barely perceptible, the smallest tremor in an otherwise perfect motion. Then he smiled. A musical reference, surely. Perhaps, or a rendezvous, she said lightly. Her songbook had a note inside. The blue note, 12th March. Mean anything to you? Only that musicians are fond of symbols, he said smoothly. I see you've been rifling through her belongings. How very enterprising. You could save me the trouble, she said. What were you both involved in, Mr. Devereux? He set his cup down carefully. Miss Vale, you have a gift for imagination. But if you persist in linking my name to this unfortunate woman's disappearance, you'll find the Foreign Office rather less amused than I am. Beatrice tilted her head. That almost sounds like a warning. It's advice, he said softly. Take it while you still have a reputation. She rose, leaning slightly across the table. Men who threaten women usually have more to hide than their pride. For a moment the charm slipped. She caught a flash of something behind his eyes, not anger but calculation. Good day, Miss Vale. As she turned to leave, his voice followed her like a thread of smoke. You'll find curiosity isn't always rewarded. At dusk, Beatrice joined Grantley at a small pub off Charing Cross. He had a file under his arm and the look of a man who'd just confirmed a suspicion. Well? She asked, sliding into the booth opposite him. He opened the file, spreading the papers like a magician revealing cards. Devereux's travel records. He was supposed to be stationed in Berlin until mid-April, but there's a 3-week gap. No reports, no expenses, no entries. He turned up in London the very week Lena performed at the government gala. And he says their connection was professional, Beatrice said. Professional enough to make her vanish, apparently. Grantley lit a cigarette. There's more. Lena's apartment yielded another clue, her songbook. We found a slip of paper inside, the blue note 12th March. Which corroborates your radio lead last night, he added. Not a club. Your recorded March 12th, 1945 note fits. Beatrice nodded. I saw it. He pretended not to recognize it. I had it analyzed, Grantley continued. The handwriting's hers, but the ink, it's from a diplomatic fountain pen, the same kind Devereux uses. Beatrice's pulse quickened. So, the blue note isn't a melody. Or if it is, Grantley said, it's one played in code. He leaned back, smoke curling around his words. You realize what this could mean? Smuggling, espionage, post-war black market. People have killed for less. Then Lena stumbled on something she shouldn't, Beatrice said softly, and told the wrong man. Grantley studied her over the rim of his glass. You're taking this personally. I watched her sing, Beatrice said quietly. She wasn't a fool. Someone made her one. Later that night, she sat alone at her desk, the lamplight catching the gold edges of her notebook. On one page, she had written R. Devereux, Berlin Gap, the blue note. On the next, Lena Marlowe, telegram from New York, Embassy Fear. The two names seemed to stare back at her, linked by invisible thread. From the radio on her shelf came the strains of a jazz tune, mellow, lilting, and hauntingly familiar. She frowned, rising to adjust the dial. The announcer's voice cut through. That was the blue note performed by the Glenn Miller Orchestra, recorded March 12th, 1945. March 12th. Her breath caught. She flipped open her notebook again, heart racing. The blue note, 12th of March. Not a place, a reference, a message in plain sight disguised as nostalgia. She wrote quickly. If Devereux was in Berlin in 45, what did he bring back? The question hung in the quiet room like a chord unresolved. At the same hour, in the dim corridors of the Foreign Office, a clerk filed away a telegram stamped confidential. The message was brief. Subject, Richard Devereux, surveillance requested. Associated name, Lena Marlowe. Prior contact, Berlin, 1945. Possible intelligence leak. The clerk sealed the folder, unaware that across the river, Beatrice Vale was already writing the headline that would turn their quiet suspicion into public thunder. Next morning, it was strange how a place could look entirely different in daylight. The Blue Velvet Club, stripped of its midnight glamour, resembled nothing more than a weary theatre caught without its makeup. Ashtrays unemptied, curtains hanging limp, tables smeared with rings of stale champagne. The air smelled faintly of last night's laughter turned sour. Inspector Hugh Grantley stepped inside first, his coat collar turned up against the drizzle. He paused to let his eyes adjust to the dim, hazy light filtering through the club's half-drawn blinds. "So this," he murmured, "is where the magic vanished." Beatrice Vale followed, notebook in hand, her heels echoing sharply across the parquet floor. "Or where it was made to vanish," she said. "The trick always looks simpler when you see it in the morning." The manager, Victor Dane, waited near the bar. His face was pale, thinner than before, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. "Inspector, Miss Vale, I didn't expect you so soon." "Routine follow-up," Grantley said, surveying the room. "We're reconstructing Miss Marlowe's final performance. Positions, timings, exits. A few things still don't add up." Dane nodded nervously. "I'll help however I can." "You'll do more than help," Grantley replied. "You'll remember." They began at the stage. The crimson curtain still hung half open, its fringe heavy with dust. Grantley motioned to a constable who switched on the footlights. They flickered uncertainly, throwing long shadows across the empty floor. Beatrice watched them come alive. "It's like the ghost of her last act," she murmured. "All that applause, and she walks off into nothing." Grantley made a note on his pad. "Miss Marlowe finished her song at 12 minutes past midnight, correct?" Dane hesitated. "Roughly, yes." "And between then and 12:20, when you found her dressing room empty, no one saw her?" "Not that I know of." Grantley turned to Beatrice. "You saw her bow?" "Yes." She smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a woman enjoying success, more like someone bracing for something inevitable. Dane exhaled shakily. "She said she had one last engagement before she was through with all this." "Engagement?" Beatrice repeated. "Meaning a performance?" "I assumed so. She'd been restless lately, talking about going abroad, Paris maybe. Said someone was arranging it for her." Grantley's pen froze above the page. "Someone named Devereux?" Dane's eyes flickered. "I never asked." Beatrice caught the hesitation. "But you suspected." "I didn't like to interfere. Lena was her own woman." "Not that night," Grantley said grimly. "That night she was someone's pawn." Millie Rose arrived soon after, wrapped in a mink coat that looked borrowed and optimism that looked forced. "I didn't expect another interview," she said, lighting a cigarette. "You must think I've something thrilling to confess." "Just talk," Grantley said. "We'll decide what's thrilling." She blew smoke toward the ceiling. Toby Fields, her pianist, was in hock to a bookmaker. Everyone knew it. That's why he kept begging Lena to help him. She was generous, too generous. But lately she'd grown tired of his sob stories. Grantley studied her expression. "And you told him so?" Millie smirked. "Inspector, I may sing, but I'm not a fool. A man in debt sings only one tune, self-preservation. When the bookies came sniffing, Toby panicked. I wouldn't be surprised if he sold information to pay them off." Beatrice's pen scratched quietly. "What kind of information?" "Oh, who knows?" Millie shrugged. "Names, maybe. Lena had friends, rich ones. She performed for people who like their names kept out of newspapers. I imagine that sort of thing costs a fortune to hide." Grantley's gaze sharpened. "Or earns one to reveal." Millie stubbed out her cigarette. "You'll never prove it, Inspector. In this business, truth is just another act." When she left, the smoke she'd exhaled hung in the air, and the silence that followed felt heavier for it. Victor Dane poured himself a drink he clearly didn't want. "She's right, you know. There's always someone keeping score. The war made sure of that." "The war?" Beatrice asked. Dane nodded, eyes unfocused. "During the blackouts, this club ran on shadows. Smugglers used the cellar to store liquor when the rationing hit. After the war, the habit stuck. Easier money than show business." Grantley's expression hardened. "You're admitting to contraband storage?" "I'm admitting to desperation," Dane said quietly. "But I cleaned it out years ago. Or thought I had." Grantley motioned toward the stage. "Show me." The trapdoor was hidden behind the stage curtain, cleverly disguised beneath a faded section of floorboard. It creaked open reluctantly, releasing a breath of cold, damp air that smelled of mildew and secrets. A narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness. Beatrice hesitated at the edge. Ever notice how cellars always know more than people upstairs? "Let's see what this one's been keeping quiet," Grantley said, switching on his torch. They descended carefully, footsteps echoing in the confined space. The beam caught on dust-covered crates stacked in uneven towers. Labels half-peeled read Scotch whisky and cognac 1943, but a few near the back were newer, the wood less worn, the stenciling sharper. Grantley crouched beside one. "American customs seal," he said, running a thumb over the paper tag, "dated 3 weeks ago." Beatrice whistled softly. So much for wartime relics. He pried the lid open with his pocket knife. Inside, straw padding hid bottles wrapped in brown paper. He lifted one out, the label beneath was blank. "Not liquor," he murmured. "Documents, maybe, or something that pays better." "Smuggling," Beatrice said quietly. "And the initials we keep seeing, RD and LM, they could mark shipments, not lovers." Grantley straightened, dust on his coat. "Or both." They found the ledger in a tin box under the lowest shelf, a thick, leather-bound volume filled with rows of neatly written numbers and initials. Most were meaningless, but some stood out in patterns. RD, LM, sometimes together, sometimes separate. Beatrice leaned over his shoulder. "Look at the dates. Every entry with both initials happens within days of a diplomatic flight from Berlin." Grantley's jaw tightened. That ties Devereaux directly to the contraband. If Lena helped move these shipments under cover of her tour performances, she may have realized what she was carrying. "And tried to back out," Beatrice said, "hence her final engagement." Grantley closed the ledger. Then someone ensured it was her last. Back upstairs, the club felt even emptier, as though the ghosts themselves had heard enough. Dane stood at the bar watching them with hollow eyes. "What did you find?" he asked. "Proof that this place's glory days weren't funded by ticket sales," Grantley said coldly. "You've been running American goods through the port. Who's your contact?" "I told you it's over," Dane protested. "That was years ago. The shipment stopped." "Not according to that seal downstairs," Beatrice cut in. "And Lena's initials are in your ledger. Why?" Dane's voice cracked. "Because she helped me, damn it, during the war. She knew people who could bring things in safely. Medicines, food, sometimes brandy for the officers. But it got darker after. Devereaux wanted to use the same routes for other cargo." "Stolen art," Grantley guessed. "Or information," Dane whispered. "I don't know which, but Lena wanted out. She told me last week that after one last trip, one last show, she was done. She even said Devereaux could hang for all she cared." Beatrice's pen stilled mid-note. "And now she's missing." Dane buried his face in his hands. "I begged her to stay clear of him, but she said she had to see it through, for both of us." Grantley exchanged a glance with Beatrice. "For both of you?" The manager looked up, defeated. "She was going to pay off my debts, sell her story, maybe, to someone who'd listen." His gaze fell on Beatrice. "Someone like you." Beatrice closed her notebook slowly. "She might have, if she'd lived to tell it." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets gleamed slick and mirror-bright beneath the lamplight. Beatrice and Grantley emerged from the club into the chill air, both silent for a long moment. "So," Beatrice said finally, "we've gone from missing singer to smuggling ring to a diplomat with too many secrets. Not bad for 48 hours. Grantley lit a cigarette. "I've seen simpler cases end worse." "You think she's dead?" He hesitated, watching smoke drift upward like ghostly ribbons. "If she isn't, she's running out of time." Beatrice folded her arms. "And if she planned this herself, staged the disappearance?" He looked at her through the rising haze. "Then she's a better actress than singer. But somehow, I don't buy it. Not after what we found downstairs." "Which means what exactly?" Grantley flicked ash into the gutter. "It means Lena Marlowe stumbled into someone's game, and they just changed the rules." Beatrice gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Smoke and mirrors, Inspector. That's all this city is made of." He pocketed his lighter. "Then let's see what's hiding behind them." Together they turned toward the waiting car, the club's neon sign flickering faintly behind them, blue light reflected in puddles like the shimmer of a vanished song. And somewhere beyond the rain-washed rooftops, the Thames rolled dark and steady, carrying with it the secrets of those who'd tried to drown them. Rain returned to London with its usual discretion, a steady, whispering drizzle that softened the city's edges and made the pavements glisten like old glass. Beatrice Vale stood beneath her umbrella outside a narrow terraced house in Hampstead, consulting the address written in Grantley's neat hand. Miss Clara Marlowe, 12 Belmont Crescent, the home of the vanished singer's estranged sister. She lowered her umbrella, knocked once, and waited. The door opened to reveal a thin woman in her 40s, pale as porcelain, her dark hair streaked with silver and pinned back with modest precision. Her eyes, sharp grey, unwelcoming, assessed Beatrice before she spoke. "Yes?" "Miss Marlowe, Beatrice Vale, Evening Gazette. I'm writing about your sister Lena." The woman's mouth tightened. "I imagined you would be. You people always arrive after the damage is done." Beatrice hesitated. "I assure you this isn't about scandal. It's about truth. The police are still searching." Clara's eyes flicked toward the rain-dim street. "Come in before you ruin my carpet." The sitting room bore the melancholy charm of someone who had once cared deeply for beauty, but no longer found reason to maintain it. Lace curtains yellowed with time, a tea service arranged precisely but unused, and a piano draped in a shawl that might once have been vibrant red. Beatrice felt the air of faded performance, a stage where applause had long ago ceased. Clara gestured toward the sofa. "She hasn't written to me in years. I told the inspector that." "You and Lena quarrelled?" Beatrice asked gently. Clara gave a dry laugh. "We quarrelled our entire lives. She had charm. I had sense. She chose the stage. I chose a quiet life. It wasn't a contest I ever hoped to win." "Did you know she was involved with a man named Richard Devereux?" The reaction was instant, a stiffening, a flash of memory behind those controlled eyes. "So, his name surfaces again." "You knew him then?" Clara moved to the mantelpiece, touching a framed photograph turned face down. With a small sigh, she lifted it upright. "I knew of him. He was the one she should never have trusted." Beatrice leaned forward. "Tell me." Clara hesitated, then crossed to a sideboard drawer. From it she retrieved a worn leather envelope bound with ribbon. Inside lay a small black-and-white photograph, slightly creased, edges yellowing. Two figures smiled from some long-forgotten summer. Lena, radiant and carefree, and beside her, unmistakably, Richard Devereux, younger, leaner, but with that same controlled charm that could mask any motive. His arm rested casually around her shoulders. Beatrice's breath caught. "So, they weren't merely acquaintances?" "Hardly," Clara said. "They met in New York. After the war, Lena married a musician named Jack Garrison, a jazz pianist. They played the nightclubs together. Then one night Jack drowned in the East River. They called it an accident." "But you don't believe that," Beatrice murmured. Clara's fingers tightened around the photograph. Lena wrote that Jack had been offered a private job, a recording for government dignitaries. Devereux arranged it. After Jack's death, Lena came home, but she wasn't the same. She spoke of debts, of being watched. Then she stopped writing. Beatrice studied the image again. So Devereux knew her husband. And now, years later, she vanishes, just as he reappears in London. Clara's voice trembled. "If you find her, tell her I never meant those last words we said. I was cruel. I told her she lived her life like a song, beautiful but finished too quickly." Beatrice slipped the photograph into her notebook. "I promise I'll tell her," she said softly. Back at Scotland Yard, Grantley sat beneath the stark light of the forensics room, a cigarette burning forgotten beside his files. Sergeant Reeves entered with a report envelope marked Evidence, Item 3, Earring, Diamond, recovered near alley door. Grantley opened it, scanning the page. "Chemical trace?" "Oil residue and salt particles," Reeves said, "consistent with exposure to river water, maybe the docks." Grantley frowned. "So she was near the Thames that night." "Or whoever took her was," Reeves said. He tapped the file. "The docks again. Limehouse, perhaps. That's where Devereux's shipments were recorded before going missing in customs." Grantley exhaled smoke slowly. "Then our diplomat's charm may have floated in with the tide." When Beatrice arrived an hour later, Grantley was pacing. "You've been digging again," he said. "I prefer to call it journalism," she replied, handing him the photograph. "Devereux and Lena, years ago, in New York. Her sister says they were more than acquaintances." Grantley studied the picture, his brow darkening. "That's no professional pose." "She was married to a pianist named Jack Garrison," Beatrice said. "He drowned under mysterious circumstances. Guess who arranged the performance that night?" "Devereux," Grantley finished grimly. They exchanged a long look. The pieces were aligning, Not neatly, but with a logic that carried its own chill. Grantley tapped the photograph. And now, years later, both her husband and her manager are dead or missing. She's either running from him or helping him. Beatrice's gaze fell to the earring report on his desk. Oil and salt, she read aloud. That means docks. Grantley, what if the Blue Note isn't a club or a song? What if it's a boat? He straightened. A boat? She mentioned it in her notes. The Blue Note, 12th March. It sounds like a code, but what if it's literal? A ship registered under that name. And 12th of March, perhaps the date it arrived in port. Grantley's eyes narrowed. You might be right. The customs ledgers show an American freighter called Blue Note docking at Limehouse twice last spring, both times under diplomatic clearance, arranged by Devereux's department. So Lena knew, Beatrice said softly. She discovered what he was smuggling. Grantley stubbed out his cigarette. And she threatened to expose him. That's why she vanished. He grabbed his coat. Come on, we're going to Limehouse. The docks at night were a kingdom of shadows. The river lay black and sluggish beneath the fog, its surface broken only by the dim gleam of moored boats and the occasional ripple of passing current. The air smelled of oil, tar, and rain-soaked rope. Grantley's torch beam cut through the mist in brief slices of light. Stay close, he said. You can get lost here even with the stars out, and tonight we haven't any. Beatrice followed, boots sinking into the damp silt. Around them, cranes loomed like sleeping giants, and the warehouses stood silent, windows shuttered. Somewhere in the distance a bell tolled from a passing steamer, one, then two, echoing faintly through the fog. She shivered. This is no place for diplomacy. Or for singers, Grantley muttered. There, see that? Ahead, half hidden behind a line of mooring posts, a small pleasure cruiser lay tilted against the quay. The faded letters on its hull caught the torchlight. Blue Note. Beatrice exhaled. She wasn't talking about music after all. Grantley approached cautiously, boots crunching on wet gravel. The gangplank sagged under his weight, creaking like a warning. No lights, no crew. She's been abandoned for weeks, maybe months. They climbed aboard. The deck was slick with rain, and puddles mirrored the faint glow of the dockside lamps. The smell of salt and engine oil hung thick. Grantley moved toward the cabin door, testing it, unlocked. Inside, the narrow corridor was lined with empty crates and a single wooden chair knocked over. A faint trail of dried mud marked the floor, leading toward the small galley. Looks like someone came through in a hurry, he murmured. Beatrice crouched near the doorframe, her torch beam catching something glinting in the grime. She brushed aside the mud and lifted it, a cigarette case, silver, engraved with the initials R.D. Devereux, she whispered. Grantley's jaw tightened. Then this was their meeting place. He used the ship to move contraband, or intelligence, under diplomatic protection. And Lena found out, Beatrice said. Maybe she came here to confront him. Grantley's voice was low. Or to bargain. He moved toward the cabin's rear hatch. Stay back, he warned, but she followed anyway. Beyond the hatch, the dockside mud stretched to the waterline, rippled by light rain. His torch beam swept across it, then stopped. There, clear as a signature, was the print of a woman's heel pressed deep into the wet earth, sharp-pointed, delicate and alone. Beatrice knelt beside it, her voice barely audible. She was here. Grantley's gaze travelled from the print to the river beyond. Maybe she still is, he said quietly. But whether she left by land or by water, that's another question. He turned off the torch. In the sudden darkness, the fog seemed to close around them like a curtain. The Blue Note creaked softly against its moorings, a ghost of a melody drifting across the Thames. And for a long moment, neither spoke, because somewhere beneath that restless tide, London was holding its secrets close. The dawn came grudgingly over the Thames, pale, cold, and damp as unfinished porcelain. A veil of mist clung to the water, turning cranes and moorings into grey silhouettes. The Blue Note floated half in shadow, her paint peeling and her name barely legible. What had once been a pleasure cruiser now looked more like a ghost ship. Inspector Grantley stood at the edge of the pier, collar turned up, watching the slow churn of the tide lap against the hull. Behind him, constables moved with careful efficiency, their boots echoing against the wooden planks. The world was still half asleep, Only the gulls in the river seemed awake enough to whisper. Beatrice Vale appeared beside him, her coat buttoned high, her notebook tucked under her arm, her breath misted in the chill. "You've been here since 4, she said quietly. "Couldn't sleep," Grantley replied. "When something starts to stink, I like to be there before it spreads." Beatrice glanced at the river. The blue note doesn't exactly hide her secrets gracefully. Grantley gave a humorless smile. "Let's find out what else she's keeping quiet." The boat's deck groaned underfoot as they boarded. The early light filtered through the mist, turning every droplet into a bead of dull silver. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of mildew and something sharper. Gun oil, faint but recent. Sergeant Reeves pointed to the corner. "Found this like it is, sir. Chair overturned, broken glass on the floor. Looks like there was a fight." Grantley crouched, running his gloved hand across the shards. "No blood, though. Someone cleaned up, or someone got lucky." Beatrice's eyes roamed the space. "A struggle without sound? That means haste, or fear." Grantley straightened. "Or planning." His gaze drifted toward a scrap of silk caught on a rusty nail near the bulkhead. It fluttered slightly with the draught. Pale cream, smooth to the touch, faintly scented with perfume. He held it up. "Silk scarf, expensive. Same brand Lena wore." Beatrice frowned. Then she was here. "Perhaps not alone," Grantley said. "This wasn't a robbery. This was business gone bad." They split the search. Grantley and Reeves combed through the storage compartments, while Beatrice explored the narrow aft cabin. The space was cramped. A bunk, a small writing desk, and a wardrobe whose door hung half off its hinge. Dust motes drifted through the slanted sunlight. Beatrice knelt beside the desk. The drawers were empty except for a single torn receipt from Victor Dane & Company, Blue Velvet Enterprises, dated a week before Lena's disappearance. She tapped her pen against the desk edge, thinking. Dane's signature looped across the paper, neat, confident, final. She rose and crossed to the floorboards, noticing a slight rise beneath the rug, not obvious, but just enough to catch the toe of her shoe. She knelt again, peeled the rug aside, and found the outline of a square panel. "Grantley!" she called. The inspector appeared at the doorway. "What have you found now, Miss Vale? More metaphors or something useful?" "Both," she said, prying the board up with a hairpin. The wood gave way with a groan. Inside lay a small trunk, battered and travel-worn. Its lock was snapped, but the inside was dry, carefully sealed against moisture. Grantley lifted the lid. Inside were Lena Marlowe's missing suitcase, the same one her maid had said vanished from her flat, and a large brown envelope marked in her looping hand, "To be opened only if I disappear." Grantley's breath caught. "Well," he murmured, "she planned ahead." Beatrice's voice was soft. She knew something would happen. Grantley sat at the desk, breaking the seal with deliberate care. Inside were several handwritten pages, cryptic notes, half-coded, half-confessional. Words and phrases leapt out. The missing ledger pages, proof of payments from RD to Dane. They used the shipments through Limehouse, false manifests. "I kept one copy hidden in the music sheets. If I vanish, look there." Beatrice leaned over his shoulder. "Ledger pages. Devereux's payments to Dane. That ties the club to his smuggling ring." Grantley nodded grimly. "And to Lena. She wasn't just a witness, she was a partner, or blackmailing one." Beatrice shook her head. "No, she wanted to expose them. That's why she wrote this." Grantley looked up at her. "And you can prove that?" Her eyes met his steadily. "She trusted me once. She told me music was her only truth. That line, hidden in the music sheets, she left it for someone who'd understand her language." Grantley folded the papers carefully. "Then you'd better translate fast, because I have a feeling Devereux's not done composing his finale." By mid-morning, the fog had thinned into drifting veils. The yard team continued their methodical sweep of the vessel. Fingerprints, footprints, anything the tide hadn't already claimed. On deck, Grantley smoked in silence, his eyes on the slow current below. Reeves approached, hat in hand. "Sir, they've found something downriver, near Wapping Pier." Grantley turned sharply. "What sort of something?" Reeves hesitated. "A body, male, fished out by the harbour patrol an hour ago." Beatrice had joined them in time to hear. "Lena?" she asked. Reeves shook his head. "No, miss, not by the clothing. Manager's license in his pocket. Victor Dane. Grantley's jaw tightened. Shot? Execution style, sir. Back of the head. No wallet, no watch. Beatrice exhaled slowly. So Dane talked to someone he shouldn't. Grantley ground his cigarette into the rail, or tried to leave the game halfway through. She watched the water, now gleaming faintly gold where the morning sun fought its way through. It's all connected. The club, the ledger, Devereaux's shipments, and now Dane's silenced. He looked at her. Then the next target's obvious. Beatrice blinked. You mean Lena? I mean you, he said quietly. You've been publishing every inference we make before I can file my reports. The man behind this isn't averse to using bullets for punctuation. She met his gaze, unflinching. Then I'll make sure my next article is worth dying for. Grantley's mouth twitched despite himself. You really don't take instruction, do you? Not unless it comes with evidence. Fine, he said. Then you'll get evidence, but from now on, you stay where I can see you. Inspector, she said dryly, if that's a proposition, it's the least romantic one I've ever heard. He gave a short laugh, rare and genuine. I wasn't hired for charm. The rest of the day blurred into movement, statements, photographs, the whirring of cameras. By afternoon, word of the discovery had reached Fleet Street. Reporters swarmed the docks like gulls after a storm, shouting questions, waving notebooks, their shoes sinking into the mud. Is it true the Blue Velvet was a front for smuggling? Was Lena Marlowe working for foreign agents? Is Miss Beatrice Vale assisting the police or hindering them? Beatrice tried to edge past them, but microphones and flashbulbs caught her like searchlights. A voice called out, Miss Vale, did you find the body? She froze for half a second, and that was all the photographers needed. The flash exploded white across her face. Grantley's voice cut through the commotion like a whip. That's enough. This is an active investigation. He guided Beatrice through the throng, shielding her with his coat. Once they'd reached the quiet of the quay, she exhaled shakily. I've covered scandals before, she said, but never one where the corpse knew my name. Congratulations, Grantley said dryly. You're officially a suspect and a headline. She shot him a look. Not in that order, I hope. He stopped, studying her face. You could pull back, you know. Let the yard handle it. And miss the ending, she said softly. Not a chance. By evening, the tide had risen again, tugging at the mooring ropes of the Blue Note. The river had that peculiar London beauty, grimy, steadfast, and secretive. Grantley stood at the rail, the envelope in his hand, watching the last of the evidence being packed away. Beatrice joined him. You ever wonder why people hide things near water? She asked. Because water forgets, he said. It erases. She looked toward the slow-moving current. Not always. Sometimes it gives back what you're afraid to find. He turned to her. You think the river will give us Lena? Beatrice's voice was almost a whisper. It already gave us Dane. And if Lena's alive, she's somewhere close enough to see what's being dredged up. Grantley tucked the envelope into his coat. Then we'll flush her out. Every secret leaves ripples, Miss Vale, even the ones meant to sink. The tide slapped softly against the hull. Somewhere upriver, a tug's whistle sounded, lonely, fading, unresolved. The inspector and the journalist stood side by side in the gathering dusk, the city stretching beyond them in fog and memory. Above the dark water, the name Blue Note gleamed faintly, like a song half forgotten, one that would soon play its final verse. London knew how to wear glamour like a disguise. That evening, Grosvenor House gleamed with so much light it might have been daylight bottled and poured into chandeliers. Cars rolled up the marble steps, each door releasing laughter, perfume, and whispers that clung to the cold October air like secrets dressed in silk. Beatrice Vale stood just beyond the revolving doors, watching the parade of masks drift past the doorman. Harlequins, phantoms, and monarchs of make-believe. Beneath her black satin domino mask, she was simply another shadow, but one that watched, calculated, and waited. Her gown was understated compared to the others, deep green velvet that made her eyes seem sharper, her silhouette taller. Around her throat, a single strand of pearls gleamed faintly, borrowed from the newspaper's expense account and, as she'd told Grantley, worth every potential scandal. A voice beside her murmured, You clean up surprisingly well, Miss Vale. She turned. Inspector Hugh Grantley, looking uncomfortable in evening dress, adjusted the bow tie that refused to cooperate. The cut of his tuxedo made him look less like a policeman and more like a diplomat who preferred confessions to cocktails. "Undercover surveillance," she said, smiling faintly. "You're supposed to blend in, not look like a suspect yourself." He offered her his arm with a grimace. "I was told the Yard frowns on dancing with journalists." "Then let's give them something new to frown about," she replied, and together they entered the ballroom. Inside, the masquerade glittered with orchestral decadence. Golden candelabra cast light over mirrored walls. Champagne glasses caught it and broke it into 1,000 small, shimmering lies. The scent of roses and expensive cigars hung in the air. The orchestra played a languid waltz as masked couples swept across the polished floor. Somewhere above, on the mezzanine balcony, the diplomatic crowd smiled too broadly, their masks no doubt hiding more than faces. Beatrice's eyes found him almost at once. Richard Devereux, the man who'd turned espionage into etiquette. He stood near the orchestra dais, dressed in a black tailcoat with a half-mask of silver and charcoal, a crimson carnation in his lapel. Even behind the mask, he radiated control, the sort that could charm or command at will. Several women lingered in orbit, but his gaze found Beatrice as if he'd been expecting her. Grantley noticed. "You're not to engage him directly," he said under his breath. "Of course not," Beatrice said sweetly, and was gone before he could protest. Devereux greeted her with a slow smile. "Miss Vale, isn't it? Or should I say, Miss Mystery? I've read your work. It's dangerously observant." She curtsied lightly. "I do my best. It's hard to write without noticing the people who'd prefer not to be noticed." He extended his hand. "Then allow me to make your research easier. May I have this dance?" The orchestra shifted, a Strauss waltz, deliberate and rich. She let him lead her onto the floor, the crowd parting like silk around them. Under the glittering chandeliers, the scene was all poise and grace, except for the tension hidden between their clasped hands. "You seem restless tonight, Mr. Devereux," Beatrice said, matching his rhythm. "Diplomatic duty doesn't usually require such nerves." His smile didn't falter. "Merely an evening's entertainment. A fundraiser for the wounded, I believe. Very noble, very English." "And yet," she said softly, "your flower is Portuguese. Rather ironic, given your upcoming travel plans." That earned her a flicker, the brief tightening of his jaw, the shift of his hand at her waist. "You're mistaken," he said. "Oh, I don't think so," Beatrice murmured. "I think you're leaving London very soon, perhaps with the help of a false passport, in the name of Lena Marlowe." His steps faltered just for a heartbeat. The mask might have concealed his expression, but not his silence. "I see my reputation precedes me," he said at last. "Or perhaps Miss Marlowe's ghost has been talking again." Beatrice leaned closer, her voice a thread between them. "Ghosts don't usually write ledgers or hide suitcases on boats named Blue Note." That did it. His hand, steady until then, tightened fractionally. His pulse jumped beneath his collar. "Careful, Miss Vale," he said quietly. "In diplomacy, curiosity is not admired. It's dangerous." "So is smuggling state secrets through the docks," she replied. For a moment they simply turned in rhythm, her dress brushing his, the chandelier light breaking over their masks like moonlight on waves. To anyone watching, it was just a waltz. But beneath the violins, the game had turned to war. He smiled again, slow, deliberate, untrustworthy. "I admire your nerve, but nerve is fragile, like truth, or journalists." And with that, he released her hand, bowed elegantly, and vanished into the crowd. Grantley appeared almost immediately, his tone clipped. "What did you say to him?" "Just enough," she replied, eyes scanning the room. "He's leaving." Grantley touched the small receiver in his ear. "All units, eyes open. Devereux's on the move." He nodded toward the far side of the ballroom where Devereux had slipped through a corridor lined with gilt-framed portraits. The inspector moved to follow, but before he reached the doorway, a commotion broke out near the service entrance. A waiter, too clumsy for a professional, had dropped his tray, scattering champagne like shattered light. But Grantley caught a glimpse beneath the man's sleeve, not livery, but a concealed radio transmitter. "Stop that man!" he barked. The waiter bolted, knocking over chairs as he sprinted toward the marble staircase. Grantley was after him instantly, weaving through startled guests, the music dissolving into gasps. Beatrice followed, skirts gathered, ignoring the shocked whispers of dowagers and diplomats. The chase wound through the mirrored corridor and down into a service passage behind the kitchens. The sound of running feet echoed between the tiled walls. Grantley caught the courier just as he reached the rear exit. They collided, struggling in the narrow space. Something fell from the courier's hand, a leather envelope, already half opened. Grantley's fist met the man's jaw and the fight ended with a dull thud. He flipped the envelope open. Inside were a passport and airline ticket. Beatrice arrived, breathless. "What is it?" Grantley held them up. Portuguese passport. Name, Lena Marlowe. Destination, Lisbon. Departure, tonight. Beatrice's eyes widened. He's escaping with her identity. Or her body, Grantley said darkly. Upstairs, the orchestra still played, trying valiantly to pretend that nothing had happened. The laughter was brittle now, the kind that trembles on the edge of fear. Grantley and Beatrice re-entered the ballroom through the mirrored corridor just in time to see Devereux standing near the grand staircase. His mask was gone now, revealing the cool, handsome face that had smiled its way through diplomatic dinners and betrayals alike. He spotted Grantley and bolted. "Devereux!" Grantley shouted, drawing his revolver. The diplomat darted into the vestibule, pushing through startled guests, his polished shoes skidding on the marble. The crowd parted in a flurry of silk and feathers. Beatrice followed, ignoring the protests of startled aristocrats. The chase tore through Grosvenor House like a storm, through the cloakroom, past the colonnade, down the sweeping gallery lined with marble statues that watched in silent judgment. The music behind them turned frantic, the orchestra caught in confusion, its tempo mirroring the pursuit. Devereux reached the far corridor, only to find two constables blocking his path. He pivoted, darting up the side staircase toward the balcony. Beatrice emerged below, calling, "Richard, stop! You'll never get out of London now." He paused on the landing, looking down at her. His face was pale, but his voice steady. "You don't understand, Miss Vale. This isn't treason. It's survival, the kind your country will thank me for in 10 years. Grantley appeared at the top of the staircase, revolver raised. "Drop it, Devereux." Devereux's smile was almost weary. "You can't arrest a ghost, Inspector." He flung something small and metallic toward the wall, a flash grenade, compact and bright. The world went white. Beatrice stumbled, blinded by the burst. When her vision cleared, Devereux was gone. Only the echo of his footsteps and the faint scent of gunpowder lingered. Grantley cursed, steadying her. "You all right?" "Fine," she said, though her voice shook. "But he's getting away." They sprinted through the adjoining corridor, bursting through the terrace doors just in time to see the rear gardens drenched in moonlight, and empty. The sound of an engine roared from beyond the hedge. Grantley ran forward, pistol raised, but it was too late. The black Daimler tore down the service drive, headlights slicing through the fog. He fired once, the bullet shattered a headlamp, but the car didn't slow. Within seconds it was swallowed by the London night. Silence fell. Only the wind moved now, stirring the rose petals scattered along the terrace. Beatrice bent to pick something from the ground, a crimson carnation, crushed but unmistakable. Grantley's gaze followed it. Same flower Lena wore at her final performance. Beatrice turned it over in her hand. "He left it on purpose," she said softly. "A calling card. Or a warning." Grantley holstered his revolver. "He's desperate. That makes him dangerous." "Or frightened," Beatrice murmured. He looked at her. "You almost sound sorry for him." She gave a small, wry smile. "I'm a journalist, Inspector. Sympathy sells more copies than revenge." Grantley's expression softened. "You realize he'll try again. A man like Devereux doesn't flee, he maneuvers." "Then we maneuver faster," she said. Together they looked back toward the ballroom. Through the open doors, the orchestra had begun a new piece. Slow, haunting, a tune that felt like an echo of Lena Marlowe's voice, drifting from another world. Beatrice held the crushed carnation a moment longer before letting it fall to the marble floor. The flower lay there, vivid against the pale stone, a final flourish of colour, a performer's bow to an audience that no longer applauded. The city slept uneasily that night. Fog hung low over the Thames like a curtain drawn to conceal unfinished business. Barges groaned against their moorings, the water slapping softly at stone. Somewhere upriver, a bell tolled 4 times. Not morning yet, not quite night either. The kind of hour when truth begins to whisper to those still awake. Inspector Hugh Grantley stood beneath the iron awning of the old Wapping warehouse, his breath misting in the cold. The building loomed ahead, its windows black and empty, its bricks slick with river damp. A single lamp above the loading bay burned a weak, jaundiced light. He checked his watch, then the revolver at his side. "Devereux's car was spotted here an hour ago," Sergeant Reeves had said. "No one's come out since." Grantley exhaled through his nose, eyes narrowing at the dark. "That's because he's not planning to leave." From behind the stack of rusted oil drums, Beatrice Vale's voice came softly. "You said I could come if I stayed quiet." Grantley sighed. "I said you could observe. You don't observe by talking." She moved closer, wrapped in her long coat, curls damp from the mist. "You'd get lonely otherwise." He gave her a sidelong glance. "You mistake irritation for affection, Miss Vale." "And you mistake caution for control," she replied. "Let's go." They crossed the loading dock, boots soundless against the slick boards. The heavy doors were ajar, just enough for the fog to curl inward like smoke. Inside, the air smelled of old rope, rust and the tang of oil, the same scent that had clung to the earring found at the club weeks before. Grantley pushed the door wider, motioning for silence. The beam of his torch cut a pale path through the gloom. Crates were stacked high, marked with faded stencils. Dane and Cumby shipping, property of ministry trade. The irony wasn't lost on him. From deeper inside came the faint creak of footsteps. He froze, listening. One step, then another. Slow, measured. Grantley drew his revolver. Beatrice's hand instinctively gripped his sleeve. Then a voice, smooth, composed, unmistakably English with the faintest trace of foreign polish, drifted through the dark. "I wondered when you'd arrive, Inspector." Richard Devereux stepped from behind a column, the glow of a hurricane lamp painting half his face in gold and half in shadow. He looked immaculate despite the hour, tailored overcoat, gloves, a scarf of fine wool, but his eyes were sleepless, rimmed in red. Grantley kept his revolver low. "You've been busy, Mr. Devereux, running out of places to hide?" Devereux smiled faintly. "I don't hide, I wait." He gestured toward the scattered crates. "The irony is poetic, isn't it? These boxes were meant to rebuild Europe, medicines, fabrics, aid. Instead, they carried diamonds, paintings, secrets. Everyone profited, Inspector. Even your government, I imagine." Grantley's voice was level. "And Lena Marlowe?" The smile flickered. "She discovered what the boxes carried. I told her it was temporary, a necessary evil after the war. But Lena had a moral streak, inconvenient given her talents. She confronted me." "She threatened to expose you," Grantley said. Devereux's jaw tightened. "She gave me a choice, confess or be destroyed. I tried to reason with her. She ran, before I could stop her." Beatrice, hidden behind a stack of crates, felt her heart quicken. His words, "ran, before I could stop her," carried something off. A tremor not of guilt, but of fear. Grantley's eyes narrowed. "You said ran, past tense." Devereux's lips thinned. "Semantics, Inspector. She's gone, isn't she?" "She's dead, you mean?" "I didn't kill her." "Then who did?" Devereux's gaze flicked briefly toward the shadows, almost involuntarily. "Ask the river. It's been a good accomplice to many sins." A faint sound broke the stillness, the soft scrape of metal against wood. Devereux's head snapped toward it. Beatrice froze. Her foot had brushed a loose coil of chain. Grantley took advantage of the distraction, stepping forward. "You've run out of stories, Devereux, and out of time." But the diplomat didn't move. Instead, he smiled, a sad, weary smile. "You think this is about money, Inspector? About smuggling trinkets and ledgers? You're playing in a game whose pieces you can't even see." Grantley cocked his head. "Try me." Devereux laughed softly, the sound hollow. "After the war, men like me were useful. We knew where the bodies were buried and where the gold was hidden. The governments wanted clean hands, so they let ours get dirty. When the profits grew, so did the hypocrisy. Lena wanted to unmask us all. She didn't understand that some lies hold the piece together." He turned, his back to the lamp's glow, and for the first time Grantley saw the pistol in his gloved hand. Small, elegant, the kind of weapon a gentleman carried when diplomacy failed. "Drop it," Grantley ordered. Devereux didn't. "I'm not your villain, Inspector. I did what I had to do to survive. You smuggled contraband under diplomatic immunity. You funded a network that got 2 men killed, Victor Dane and, by your account, Lena Marlowe." Something flickered across Devereux's face. Not guilt, regret. "Victor panicked," he said quietly. "He wanted out. He threatened to tell the Americans, so, yes, I had him silenced. But Lena," his voice broke for the first time, "she was never supposed to be part of this." Beatrice's breath caught. She could feel the tremor beneath the words. Not confession. Confession was too clean for this. It was something closer to mourning. Grantley took a slow step forward. "Where's the rest of it? The jewels, the ledgers, the names?" Devereux's eyes lifted, glittering with something unreadable. "You'll find them soon enough, Inspector, but you won't like the company they keep." He raised the gun. Beatrice gasped. Grantley aimed instantly. "Don't be stupid." "I'm tired," Devereux said softly. "And tired men make stupid choices." Then a new sound cut the tension, faint, hesitant, human. A woman's voice trembling through the stillness. "Don't shoot." Both men turned. From the shadows at the far end of the warehouse, a figure stepped forward. Her coat was soaked, her hair disheveled, but her face, pale, luminous, unmistakable, caught the lantern light. Lena Marlowe. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the river outside seemed to hold its breath. Devereux's voice broke into a whisper. "Lena?" She nodded slowly. "You didn't expect me to haunt you this soon, did you?" Beatrice stepped out from her hiding place, eyes wide. "My God, you're alive." Lena's gaze flicked briefly to her, then back to Devereux. "Barely. I ran because I had to. After Victor was killed, I knew I was next. You couldn't let me speak, not after I'd seen the manifests, the shipments, the payments." Devereux's hand trembled on the gun. "You think I wanted you dead?" "You planned it," she said quietly. "You told Dane it was necessary. You just didn't know I was listening." Grantley watched the exchange with the precision of a man timing a fuse. "You faked your disappearance," he said. Lena nodded. "I left my things in the dressing room, hid in the car boot of a courier who smuggled me out to Limehouse. I was waiting for proof, the ledger, the seals, enough to make them listen." Devereux's tone hardened. "And what would you have gained? Justice? There's no justice in exposing corruption, only new corruption." She took a slow step toward him. "I didn't want justice. I wanted freedom. From you. From all of it." "Lena!" She stopped him with a look, weary, sorrowful. "You lied to me about everything, even love." The silence that followed was unbearable. Then Devereux's gun hand shifted. Just enough. Grantley reacted on instinct. "Don't!" The gunfire cracked through the stillness. Once, twice. The echoes rolled out across the river like thunder answering thunder. When the smoke cleared, Devereux was on his knees, his gloved hand clutching his side, the pistol clattering to the floor. He looked up at Grantley with something almost like gratitude. "Well," he whispered, "at least the truth won't travel far." He slumped forward. The lantern flickered, casting his fallen shadow long across the concrete floor. Lena stood frozen, hands pressed to her mouth. "He would have killed us both," she said faintly. Grantley holstered his weapon. "He already did, just slower." Beatrice moved to Lena's side, steadying her. "It's over," she said gently. "He can't hurt anyone now." Lena's eyes filled, the weight of years collapsing into exhaustion. "I never wanted it to end this way. I only wanted to sing again." "Then sing," Beatrice said softly. "Sing in your own name, not his." Outside, the fog was breaking. Pale light began to creep over the water, turning the surface silver. The world, indifferent as ever, was beginning another day. Grantley crossed to the open doorway, the river wind tugging at his coat. Reeves and 2 constables were approaching along the pier. "Inspector," Reeves called, "we heard shots." Grantley raised a hand. "It's finished." As they entered, Beatrice glanced once more at Devereux's still form. A trickle of sunlight caught the fallen lamp, glinting off something beside him, a leather pouch half open, spilling a cascade of jewels across the floor. Diamonds, emeralds, rubies, cold, glittering, and meaningless now. Beatrice shook her head. the spoils of men who mistake possession for power. Grantley's expression was grim, and power for survival. By the time the body was covered and the evidence bagged, dawn had fully claimed the river. The fog thinned to ribbons, and the distant bells of St. Paul's rolled across the city like absolution. Lena stood near the doorway, her face pale but resolute. "What happens to me now?" she asked quietly. Grantley looked at her, then at Beatrice. "You tell the truth. To her." Beatrice nodded. "Every word. And not just in print." Lena managed a faint, wistful smile. "Then perhaps this time someone will listen." The inspector extended his hand to Beatrice. "Come on, Miss Vale. We've got statements to write and headlines to dodge." She smiled wearily. "I do my best work at dawn." They stepped out onto the pier together, the morning light rippling across the Thames. Behind them, the warehouse stood silent, another secret finally emptied. The river moved on, carrying away its ghosts. The Blue Velvet reopened on a Thursday night, quietly, discreetly, without the fanfare that once turned its doors into magnets for London's restless hearts. The rain outside shimmered under the new neon sign, softer now, its letters glowing not with bravado, but with a kind of weary elegance. Inside, the air was still the same mixture of cigarette smoke, perfume, and something more elusive, memory. The tables gleamed under polished lamps, the velvet curtains had been replaced, and the orchestra tuned with a nervous energy that felt like the hush before confession. Beatrice Vale sat at her usual corner table, her notebook closed for once. She wasn't here to report tonight, she was here to listen. The stage lights dimmed, and then, there she was, Lena Marlowe, alive, thinner, and touched by a quiet that no applause could penetrate. Her gown was simple black satin, her hair drawn back in soft curls that glistened like polished mahogany. When she stepped up to the microphone, the room fell into reverent silence, as if everyone sensed that what they were about to hear wasn't performance but farewell. "Good evening," she said, her voice low, almost shy. "It's been a while." The crowd murmured their approval, but she raised a hand, smiling faintly. "No encores tonight, just one song." The pianist struck the first notes. Slow, minor, familiar. The melody curled through the smoke like a whisper from another life. "I'll remember you." Her voice was softer now, fragile but luminous, like light through frosted glass. Every word carried the weight of things unspoken, the fear, the guilt, the gratitude for still being alive. At the bar, a man lifted his glass and took a slow sip. His hat shadowed most of his face, but the angle of the jaw, the deliberate stillness, unmistakable. Inspector Hugh Grantley. He wasn't there as a policeman tonight. He'd left his badge in his desk drawer, the case file stamped closed. He watched Lena without expression, though his hand tightened once around the glass as she reached the final verse. "When shadows fall and dreams depart, I'll remember you with all my heart." The last note hung in the air, pure, unwavering, then gone. The audience didn't clap at first. They simply sat there, suspended in silence. Then gradually the applause began, soft, respectful, not the raucous adoration of her earlier years, but something deeper. An acknowledgement, a benediction. Lena smiled faintly, bowed once, and stepped away from the microphone. The curtain began to fall, slow and deliberate, the red velvet folding her into its embrace. And as it did, a single red feather, a relic of her old boa perhaps, or simply poetic coincidence, drifted down from the stage lights. It twisted in the air, glowing scarlet against the haze, before settling gently on the polished bar near Grantley's drink. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. It felt impossibly light, like something that shouldn't be able to bear the weight of memory, yet somehow did. Across the room, Beatrice rose. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but the exchange was enough. Respect, gratitude, and the quiet understanding that some truths didn't need to be spoken. They just needed to be carried. Grantley placed the feather beside his glass, left a few coins on the counter, and slipped out into the rain. Beatrice watched him go, then turned back toward the stage. The orchestra had resumed with a bright, meaningless tune to fill the silence, but the room's mood had changed. It felt softer, older. She opened her notebook, not to write, but to reread the final lines of her article. The headline she'd chosen was simple: The Song That Wouldn't Die. She'd written it weeks ago, the night after the warehouse, when Lena had finally told her everything. The smuggling network, the coded manifests, Devereaux's ambition and downfall, the truth in all its bitter complexity. But Beatrice hadn't printed it all. Some things, she decided, belonged not to the public, but to the private corners of the human soul, the places where guilt, love, and survival blur into one. Her editor had protested. "You're burying half the story," he'd said. She'd smiled. "No, I'm saving what's left of it." And now, watching Lena's empty stage, she knew she'd done right. Later that night, after the last guests had left and the lights were dimmed, Beatrice lingered at her table. The manager, a kind-eyed young man who'd taken over the club's lease, approached quietly. "Miss Vale, Miss Marlowe asked me to give you this." He handed her a small envelope, cream-coloured and faintly perfumed. The handwriting was elegant, looping. "Dear Beatrice, I've read your article. Thank you for letting me keep a little dignity and a little silence. They're rarer gifts than fame ever was. I'm leaving London for good this time. Somewhere quiet. Maybe the Riviera, maybe just the countryside. I haven't decided yet. I'll let the world forget me, and I'll remember only what's kind. If you ever write about me again, make it fiction. Real life has used up all my good lines. Yours, with gratitude, Lena." Beatrice smiled faintly as she folded the letter and slipped it into her notebook. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. The street lamps glowed softly, their reflections trembling in the puddles. She stood under the club's awning a moment, watching the city breathe, the same city that had swallowed and spat out 100 such stories, most of them never told. Grantley was waiting by the corner, leaning against a lamppost, his collar turned up. "Still working?" he asked. "Always," she said. He nodded toward the club. "She was good tonight." "She was brave tonight," Beatrice corrected. "There's a difference." He smiled a little. "You'll write about it?" "No," she said. "I'll remember it." They fell into step together, walking toward Piccadilly where the lamps burned golden against the fog. For a while neither spoke. Then Beatrice said quietly, "Do you ever think about what happens after the case is solved?" Grantley's answer came after a pause. "Always, but that's not the part they print." She gave a small laugh. "Maybe it should be." The rain started again, fine and steady, like applause from somewhere far away. Grantley tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Vale." "Good night, Inspector." She watched him vanish into the mist, his shape dissolving into shadow and lamplight. Then she turned back toward the blue velvet. Through the fogged glass she could still see the stage, empty now, except for a single spotlight burning down on the microphone. The red feather was still there, motionless on the bar. Beatrice walked over, lifted it gently, and tucked it between the pages of her notebook. "Every story needs a last line," she whispered. She glanced once more at the stage, at the ghost of a woman who had sung her own truth and paid its price. Then she smiled, small, private, final. And as the doors closed behind her, the blue velvet settled into silence again, the kind that follows not tragedy, but peace. Some mysteries don't end with triumph. They end like a song does, softly, honestly, in a note that lingers just long enough for the heart to remember.